Hello and welcome. Katy here. Thanks so much for stopping by. I am back with another project for Miss Ink Stamps, and today I'm totally inspired by Debbie Hughes from Lime Doodle Designs. One of her latest projects that I saw inspired me to want to try to recreate something with Miss Ink Stamps products. So I've got the Artsy Abstract stencil. I'm going to use the leafy stencil. And I'll show that to you in a second. That one there. And then I've got the Woodcut Floral. Now for that stamp, I'm just going to use that small stamp. It's an open lined stamp. And then I've got some hot press watercolor paper. I've got a hex die that will die cut that watercolor paper out with. And I'm going to use some ivory cardstock. I love her color palettes. This just happens to be from Gina K, that ivory layering cardstock. It's 80-pound weight. And then I've got some Distress Ink, Speckled Egg, and Antique Linen. And then I've got some light modeling paste for our texture paste to do our stenciling with. And then I've got white embossing powder and some Versamark ink for our embossing. But I just love her color palettes. I love the muted look, and I've never tried to recreate one of her projects, so this seemed easy enough that I thought I'd give it a try. So I'm going to do a little bit of stamping. I'm not going to show you all the stamping because it's repetitive. You don't need to see it. You get the idea after a few stampings. But I'm going to just treat my watercolor paper with anti-static powder. That's kaolin clay powder, so nothing fancy. You can get that in any health food store, really. You just want to make sure you have a clean powder brush, fluffy brush, to apply it on. Don't put your fingers on it with the oils and everything. Keep it clean, but you can put that stuff in a jar. You don't need a fancy applicator or anything, but kaolin clay powder is the best anti-static powder. Anyway, almost done. Just going to do one more stamping just to give you that idea of what we're doing here. I will heat set once I get all the stamping and the embossing powder added, and then we'll do our watercoloring. But first we're going to do our back panel with our modeling paste, because we need to let it dry. It's going to take some time for that to dry. But the Liquitex light modeling paste, I chose this because it keeps your cardstock or your paper that you're working on flexible even when it dries. Sometimes texture pastes, they're really super hard when they dry, and sometimes it makes your paper a little bit more rigid. So the light modeling paste really does help to keep it flexible even when it's dry, which is nice. Now I'm making a mess here. I'm not trying to be neat and pretty with adding this texture paste with these leaves. You can see I'm kind of overlapping and, just making a mess, but I'm okay with it because it's just texture, and that's what I was going for. So it doesn't bother me. If it bothers you, do each piece separately. Add your texture paste, let it dry, move on to the next section, and just let each one dry, in between before you add the next layer. So now we're working on our watercolor panel. Now I'm using, again, Speckled Egg and Antique Linen. And I do use just a spray bottle and spritz down my watercolor paper. So I'm doing a wet on wet technique. And starting off with the Speckled Egg, I really focus most on this. Now, I initially did it, I did a little test doing some ink smushing because that's fun, it's easy, but it was too dark. It didn't turn out right, even though I could have done something wrong with it, who knows. But I found this technique for me using a nice big number 10 round watercolor brush worked best for me to add on my colors to keep it light and not too dark. Unlike ink smushing. Ink smushing can be a little tricky if you're not using enough water, and sometimes you can go too far with the smushing, and I think that's what I did. So I opted to give the brush a try, and I thought it worked out perfectly for me. If you want to try this technique, go ahead and try the ink smushing. Just make sure you use plenty of water and kind of really check each layer as you do it. And definitely, I was kind of mixing the antique linen and the speckled egg at the same time instead of doing one color at a time. So that could have been it too, who knows. But again, this technique worked well for me. So I added in that antique linen there at the bottom and brought it up a little bit into the speckled egg. And I am heat setting. So as I go through each process of adding color, I do heat set because I need to build the color up. These are really nice soft colors, which works so well with this palette with the soft gray cardstock and the ivory layering panel with the modeling paste that we did on there. So I wanted to make sure that I kept everything light. So here I'm just checking with my hex die to see if I need to add more color or if I can move on to the next step. So I'm drying this really well. And then I'm going to come in and do a little bit of splattering. So I really like using a fan brush to splatter. It gives nice fine sprays, nice fine splatter. And whereas I'm going to use a number 10 here in a second, the same brush I used to paint with for splattering also. So those bigger, heavier brushes will give bigger droplets. So it really depends on the look that you're going for. So sometimes you need two, just like I'm going to do here. So I do add, water to the glass mat, add speckled egg, and I kind of go back and forth until I fill up the panel with as much of the light splatter that I feel is necessary. And I will say this, the splatter really made all the difference in this panel. It looked good without it, but once I added that fine splatter, it totally changed the way this looked. It really elevated it. So splatter is a good thing, even though it can be messy. So here I'm coming in with the number 10. I did that. I wanted some bigger splatter. I wanted some bigger droplets of that speckled egg. And so, again, adding water to the glass mat. Now I need more water. So the thing with splattering is, especially with big brushes like that, number 10, you need a lot of water so that you'll get those drops, right? So you can see it's happening really easily now. Excuse me. And I will go in. I must have done that already. So now we're going to heat set it. We're all good. The splatter was where I wanted it, and now I've got to dry it because I got to die cut this. I don't like to die cut wet cardstock, so I'm really using that heat gun to dry both sides. And now we're going to work on our sentiment. This is from the Everyday Sentiment stamp set. It's Thinking of You, and such a wonderful stamp set to have because the font is great and there's tons of sentiments in there that can be used for anything. I chose the Thinking of You because I just thought the softness of the color palette worked really well for it. So now the vellum there though is 48 pound. You want a good, nice, heavyweight vellum, especially because we're going to put a little foam on the back, and it's nice and sturdy. It's not flimsy. So I added some. I think it's ivory. It's from May Arts. I'll link it up down below. Jute twine, and I tried it without it, and kind of looked at it to see, and I just liked the extra little bit that the twine gave. So that is something that you could leave out if you wanted to. I did cut little slivers of foam tape and put it just behind the words. So they're really small. I will add some liquid glue to those pieces of foam to make sure that it's going to adhere down to our little watercolor die cut. Because they're so small, there's not much tackiness there. So the liquid glue will definitely help keep it adhered. And the foam tape gives it some dimension, but that finishes up the card. I love how it turned out. I hope you did too. If you did, please give the video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Be sure and check the description box below for the products used. And follow us over at Miss Ink Stamps Facebook group and share what you guys are making. We'd love to see what you guys are creating. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you in the next video.